Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here on this wonderful Saturday. I hope that you have enjoyed all the other sessions that we have had. And as we are getting close to the end of our conference, we are extremely eager to have the director of the New Jersey Office for New Americans with us today. We are extremely happy, Johanna, to have you here. The mission of our organization for more than 20 years has been to help the immigrant community to get involved, to get adjusted, and obviously to incorporate into the American society. So we are extremely happy that this administration had the initiative to pass Order 74, which I'm sure that you're going to be talking about in great detail, and to have the Office of the New Americans, because obviously we can do extensive work together in the benefit of our community. Johanna Calle is the Senior Policy Advisor at the Office of New Americans at the New Jersey Department of Human Services. In this role, Ms. Calle works on identifying, developing, and executing policies and strategies to advance efforts to welcome and empower immigrant communities in the state of New Jersey. Prior to joining the department, Johanna served as the director of the New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice. She played a key role in the passing of the legislation to expand access to driver licenses to all, and in the implementation of the Attorney General's Immigrant Trust Directive. Johanna's professional experience also includes working the National American Civil Liberties Union and participating in the ACLU of Northern California MIA-CLU campaign, visiting various facilities fighting for immigrants' rights. She has a bachelor's degree of arts in sociology and political science from the College of New Jersey and a master's of criminal justice from Rutgers University. Johanna, tell us a little bit, if you want to tell us a little bit more about you, and also, obviously, we are very, very interested in knowing all the details about the Office of New Americans.
Thanks for having me, Eliana, and I think it's really exciting that you're having this event. It's just so important to have these conversations about the immigrant community broadly across the state of New Jersey and how to better support them and how to better make sure that the state is really serving them, right? And that we are actually responding to their needs and their concerns, because they are part of our community here in the state of New Jersey. In terms of my background, I think it's just, it's been great to be where I am today after having worked with immigrant communities and for immigrant communities for a very long time, working in immigrants' rights advocacy for nearly 6 years, having seen how many people have been fighting for many of these efforts. You mentioned driver's licenses, and you mentioned the Immigrant Trust Directive and all those policies that our community have been fighting for and advocating for a very long time here in New Jersey. And under the Murphy administration, we have been able to see so many of them come to fruition. And obviously the executive order that you mentioned is another part of that, in seeing how many policies, proposals, and initiatives have been implemented in the state of New Jersey that are for the benefit of immigrant and refugee communities that ultimately benefit all of us, right? And it benefits everyone, not just them, but it benefits the whole state as a whole. And I think for us to think about just the Office of New Americans really is to ensure that we are being mindful and thoughtful about how to make sure that we support new New Jerseyans, because that's what they are. They are New Jerseyans, and they have made New Jersey their home. And for us to think through what are those initiatives and policies, like language access, like workforce integration, like implementing and supporting many of these policies, and really thinking through how to better ensure that they feel like New Jersey is really working for them. So I don't know if you have, go ahead.
No. So can you tell us a little bit about when was the office created?
Sure.
And I know that, well, you're going to be talking about it. I'm not going to take your words, but as soon after the office was created, we got hit with COVID. So if you want to just tell us a little bit what the
Yeah.
office has done since its creation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I came on board in April of 2020, right as we were dealing with COVID. Prior to my joining, the Department of Human Services and the Department of Labor were outlined in the executive order as the agencies that were going to be creating the Office of New Americans. This is a partnership between the two agencies. And so both the Department of Human Services and the Department of Labor really did some extensive work on talking to stakeholders, learning more about the immigrant communities and looking at data and having conversations and really identifying what are those key aspects of our communities and resources and initiatives that really make sense to prioritize and make them part of the major goals of the Office of New Americans. I mentioned language access, and that's being one of them. Workforce integration is another. Ensuring that there's accessibility to programs and services that are available by the state, and that we continue to partner with stakeholders, much like you all, in talking about what are some ways that we can adjust and prioritize these communities as we're working on various initiatives across the state. For I think for a long time in immigrant communities, we sort of think of immigrant communities as this silo, right? Immigrant communities have particular issues that are only immigrant issues, but the fact is that all issues are immigrant issues and all immigrant issues are for all. And so if we just sort of think of it that way, then we can make sure that we are integrating these communities in everything we do. So that's sort of how they came to these priorities and those goals. And I came on board in April as a senior policy advisor to help establish the office, to think through how are we going to move forward this initiative and make sure that we put it together. We had a report that came out in October, shortly after, that really outlined these goals and priorities. But as you mentioned, COVID was front and center in our jobs. And so when I started in April, one of the first priorities was to support our colleagues in the New Jersey Department of Health to think through how do we support immigrant and refugee communities? How do we outreach to immigrant and refugee communities around COVID? And at the time, we were merely focusing on contact tracing and testing and making sure that folks were healthy. We didn't even have a vaccine back then. Right. And so really thinking through how do we know that immigrants are essential workers, that they are in situations and in positions and jobs that put them at greater risk. We also obviously have seen a lot of the data for immigrants and even Latinos, the number of Latinos that have been impacted by COVID. We understand that. And so because there's such a high risk, we want to prioritize that we keep in mind, how do we think about doing outreach to these communities and supporting and being mindful of the barriers and challenges that they might be facing in COVID. Around that time, Governor Murphy also signed an executive order that allowed for foreign educated physicians to get temporary licenses to be able to help us with the COVID response here in New Jersey. So we also partnered with, the Division of Consumer Affairs to think through how do we help. We know that so many of our New Jerseyans are foreign educated. They might have gotten a medical license and practiced in their home country. They might have been nurses in their home country. How do we think about them being folded into our workforce? And so that executive order was for physicians only, but it was just a really good opportunity to sort of have that conversation and how many of them we know are essential workers and really supported us through this pandemic.
And Johanna, on that topic, it's interesting because we know that foreign individuals have a higher rate in serving in the health industry.
Mm-hmm.
So they have been in the front of this entire pandemic. And obviously that's all across the nation, but definitely New Jersey, we're there as well. So the fact that foreign physicians were able to get the license is a great thing. Now, in terms of the licenses,
Mm-hmm.
is this something that is still happening because we're not over with the pandemic? I mean, obviously we're at a better position now, but we're still living it. Is that something that physicians can still apply for that license? And if you can tell us a little bit about the process.
Yeah, and I would refer, our Division of Consumer Affairs has a lot more information on the details of this, but my understanding is that it's still in place. Governor Murphy just ended the emergency for the COVID emergency response order, and so that ended some of the executive orders that were put in place during this COVID response. However, this particular executive order, I believe, is still good through January. And so folks could still apply. But obviously, you know, we understand that folks, there are many others, not just physicians, right, that would like to get licenses in the state of New Jersey. And that's where Governor Murphy actually signed a legislation that was passed that allowed folks to get professional licenses regardless of status. And so that beyond that executive order, in the state of New Jersey, there have been legislative changes that were able to allow that. So now anyone can apply for a professional license, so long obviously as they are qualified and have gone through the education and can qualify for all the licensing credentialing requirements. They can apply for a professional license in the state of New Jersey regardless of their immigration status because of that legislation. So beyond that executive order, that is also available, and that's all through the Department of Consumer Affairs, the Division of Consumer Affairs.
So we're really talking about two different things. We're talking
Correct.
about the emergency executive order that was that allowed for physicians to apply for temporary licenses. But now you're talking about other occupational licenses, if you will, that is not related to COVID, correct?
That is correct. And
Right.
so the physician executive order may expire in January, but this other professional occupational licensing piece is legislation, it's law, and that is happening now. And so it is available for all occupational licenses, regardless of status.
So we're talking about beauticians and those kinds of things, which is wonderful because I know that there are a lot of schools in New Jersey that obviously graduate a large number of immigrants, and obviously you know, their hope is to be able that as soon as they graduate, they obtain their licenses and they're able to work. And I know that that was a big obstacle for them. So, you know, we applaud the administration for having passed this legislation. That's wonderful.
Yes.
Johanna, let's talk a little bit about immigration.
Yes.
I know that also this administration has resumed the State Refugee Resettlement Program. And with that, there is some funding available for individuals that are placed in removal proceedings, which is the deportation proceedings. Can you tell us a little bit about where can individuals go to seek that help, that assistance, and also if there is, what is the eligibility requirement?
Yeah, so those are two separate things, right? The state of New Jersey took on the role of being the Refugee Resettlement Agency here in the state of New Jersey. So through the New Jersey Division of Family Development actually has our state refugee coordinator from the state of New Jersey who works with CBOs and nonprofits that help settle refugees through the Office of Refugee Resettlement from the federal government, right? And we know on the refugee side that we have heard from the Biden administration that the numbers are going to be changing. We're going to see more refugees coming into the United States. Many of them are going to settle in New Jersey, and we're so glad to be able to do that. Unfortunately, the prior administration decided not to do that, and we had to sort of build that up in New Jersey again. And that's why we have that now. So that's one program and one piece. The other is that about 3 years ago, Governor Murphy actually allocated in the budget and through with the partnership, obviously with the legislature, to allocate at the time it was $3.2 million that provided legal representation for folks facing detention and deportation who were low income, who couldn't find an attorney of their own. And those dollars were allocated to 4 community-based organizations, nonprofits: New Jersey Legal Services, American Friends Service Committee, Rutgers Law Clinic, the Immigration Law Clinic, and Seton Hall University. And so those are the 4 providers that are funded through this program. And that funding has since doubled to $6.2 million. And currently in the proposed budget, there's a proposed budget to bring that up to $8.2 million. And so when the dollars were doubled last year, and also when the ONA was created, those dollars were actually moved to the Office of New Americans to be overseen under our office. And so we work closely with these providers to really support them as they are supporting their clients, and to really ensure that folks who are detained in the state of New Jersey and folks who are facing deportation are really getting the help that they need. So right now, the way the program is working is that those providers are screening for folks who need representation, who are facing deportation, especially in the detention centers. Through COVID, they really had to spend a lot of time going into the detention facilities. I'm sure many of you have heard that COVID was spreading very quickly in immigration detention centers. Many of our family members were there fighting to get out of there and avoid a deportation, but also avoid getting sick. And so that became really a top priority for these providers. And they were doing a lot of hearings and trying to get families out of there so that they would be healthy and at home. And so that really has been a big priority through COVID in representing folks who are in the detention centers and make sure that they were able to get that representation. So folks can get screened through there, or folks can actually reach out to New Jersey Legal Services or American Friends Service Committee to get screened and see if they qualify. Really, it's are you facing detention and deportation, and are you low income and therefore cannot afford a representation and attorney of your own?
I tell you that I'm an immigration attorney, and I know how difficult it is for immigrant families when one of their members face deportation, because not only they have to deal with the pain of having somebody detained, but the cost involved, and even when the attorney requests for bond, the bond agencies do not work like the bond agencies used to work for criminal cases. They usually do not give bonds for immigration cases. So people really are facing with having to come up with a lot of money for the bond and for the representation. So this is another great benefit that it's extremely important. And
Yes.
talking about that topic, in New Jersey, we have received a lot of unaccompanied children, and it is estimated that about 15,468 minors have arrived in New Jersey. A lot of those minors, obviously, we have that number because they have been detained at the border and then they have been rejoined with family members in New Jersey. Is this resettlement program, does the program give some funding for these minors as well?
So no, the legal representation program is for detention deportation, right? Like that's a separate funding. The refugee resettlement is for the refugee program. And this is where I think a lot of us, it's really, immigration law is just so, I mean, this, it's so incredibly confusing. And so when you look at, these are asylees. And so they're actually coming in as asylees, not as refugees. And so they actually don't fall under the refugee resettlement program. They are in a separate sort of bucket. There should be other funding. I know that federally, the Health and Human Services, the Department of Health and Human Services, and Office of Refugee Resettlements at the national and the federal level have posted information for nonprofits who are interested in supporting the unaccompanied minors and in becoming licensed providers for this particular community, because these, they're children and they have specific needs and specific resources that are provided to them because they are unaccompanied and because they are minors. And so I would, for nonprofit CBOs that are interested, I would point them to look at the Department of Health and Human Services, and these are federal, right? The Federal Department of Health and Human Services and the Office of Refugee Resettlement, to see if they have any opportunities for funding on that front, but not through the state, because that's a separate national movement, national process. But in New Jersey, we are in touch with the providers that work with unaccompanied minors. I think we are very aware and very concerned with the fact that with the asylum in the refugee process, there is a pipeline to connect the refugees to the refugee resettlement process and through the CBOs that support them. On the unaccompanied minor side, many of them arrive to our state, they've settled with their families, and there's no real pipeline for us to know where they are to really support them, right? School districts are going to be facing with supporting them and registering them and figuring out how to best educate them with all the needs that they have. How do you provide them mental services, mental health services, and all the legal services, obviously really important because they still have to file for asylum. So we're very aware of those challenges and really want to be mindful of them. And so we still are talking to stakeholders and CBOs and nonprofits and experts that are supporting these families just to better understand what are the needs that are happening and where they are right now. There's no program or funding right now available for these communities, at least not from the Office of New Americans, but it is important for us to know what are the challenges and what are the needs that the families are facing and these children are facing when they arrive in the state. Because even though there are other programs that are available for all, regardless of status, we have the Division of Mental Health and Substance Abuse here under the Department of Human Services here in New Jersey. And we know so many of these families are going to need support for mental health services. Many of those services are available to all, regardless of status. So some of our services and programs may not be for undocumented folks or for unaccompanied minors, but there are resources available that maybe some of those providers could take advantage of.
Right. And, the mental health issue is very, very significant in this topic because we know that the children, because they have had to go through that very traumatic experience, they suffer from depression, they suffer from anxiety. And perhaps the schools are probably the best institutions to help identify when these students are going through a very difficult time and perhaps make the connection with the health providers. So, but this is wonderful. It's wonderful that the office is cognizant of the fact that this is an issue, that this is a challenge, and that this is something that we have to work together. So let's move on to a better news, I guess, something very optimistic that happened in the state, relatively recent. Tell us a little bit about the driver licenses. I mean, we are one of the very few states in the nation that now provides driver licenses to undocumented.
Yeah, so I'm a little biased, obviously, because as you said, I was very involved in the advocacy to pass the legislation. It was really exciting to see it come through after decades of fighting for it and really understanding how many of our communities benefit from it. The state of New Jersey, I believe, was the 15th state to pass the legislation. Because we were saying we were going to have a quinceañera for it because it was the 15th and we were so excited.
I'm sure our community can relate to that.
Yes, it took a bit for us to get there, but we got it done. And so from the Office of New Americans, what we've been doing really is supporting our division, the motor vehicles division and just supporting them in terms of how they're implementing, right? They are really the implementing department. They are the ones that you're going to the motor vehicles to get your driver's licenses, and they're the ones who are doing it. But we've been supporting them and just thinking through the outreach, the community, the questions that we know a community is going to have. What languages are we going to be providing for immigrant communities? New Jersey, some facts that I think are so important for us to be mindful of. New Jersey has the 5th largest undocumented population in the nation by percentage. We have the 3rd by percentage largest foreign-born population. And I know when we think about immigration, we think of Latinos, we think of Spanish-speaking folks, but the fact is that our immigrant community is very diverse here in the state of New Jersey. And so we can translate to Spanish, but we have to translate to so many more languages and really be mindful of that. And so to really think through that with the Department of Motor Vehicles and supporting them in their implementation and helping them if they have any questions as they think through how to make the process culturally accessible, language accessible, and thinking through what questions our community is going to have. So that's really what our role has been, is really just supporting them in their implementation. But it's been great to see how many people have been able to go get their driver's licenses and get their permits and see it come to fruition and see how many people are breathing a little bit easier now that they're going to be able to drive with a license and not really be concerned about having that become an issue, because we know how many of our families for a long time risk deportation, right? Just by getting behind the wheel without a license. So this is a major, major win.
Well, I congratulate you for your advocacy. I know that any advocacy work takes years and years to be able to see the result. And I know how hard you worked on this. So congratulations. This is definitely for the benefit of our community, and really is for the safety of our state, right? Because to the extent that people have licenses, obviously they're going to be able to get insurances as well. So, I mean, obviously people were driving without a license, not by choice, but because
Right.
they didn't have any other alternative. So
Yeah,
in
and sorry, I just to cut you off, but just to also add that there are many advocacy organizations that worked on this effort. It was really a huge group effort, and
yes.
many of them right now are doing community meetings and doing Facebook Lives and answering questions. And so I think for folks who are having questions, I'm sure you're all doing the same thing. It's just to go to your community-based organization, link up with organizations that are trustworthy, that are getting you information. Go to the Motor Vehicles website, obviously, where we have a lot of good information, but it's always good to see how many folks across the country, the state, are really working toward getting the information to the community and letting them know that it's here.
Right, right. And you mentioned something very interesting, but we know that New Jersey is one of the most diverse states in our nation. And I was doing a little bit of research, and I see that the languages that are mostly spoken in New Jersey are a lot. Spanish, obviously, but we have Tagalog, Chinese, Hindu, Korean, Gujarati, Portuguese, Arabic, Polish, and Russian.
Yeah.
So the state has a huge challenge to be able to educate and include all of these communities. How does the state manage to meet the linguistic challenges, especially the Office of New Americans? You have you have a lot to cover, Johanna.
Yes, and you know, when you know, as we talked about coming on board in April, I was really hoping that we could start on the language access piece from the get. And part of it, I think we've been able to do because under, for instance, for COVID with the Department of Health, they have been able to translate to so many languages, and you'll see flyers and information in many languages, either translated through the Department of Health or through FEMA or through various different resources that have been made available to make sure that we have all that information available in various languages. The call line that you can call to register for a vaccine was actually available in about 240 languages. You could call and have somebody on the phone and translate for you, be able to make sure that they were interpreting and being able to get you registered for the vaccine. And so those are things that, you know, based on the project and the initiative, we do everything we can to figure out how to make it accessible. We do the same thing here in the Department of Human Services for NJ Family Care, which, you know, there were news about the Cover All Kids initiative, which is expanding healthcare to all children. Our NJ Family Care phone number, you can call, and same thing, you can get yourself an interpreter who's going to interpret in your home language. There are flyers in multiple languages. That's what we do to make sure that folks have that information in their language, but there's always room for improvement. And this is where within the Office of New Americans, we are really doing our best to do some research. There are best practices that have been happening across the country, right? Our neighbors right in New York have language access executive voter, and you look at our partners in Boston and Seattle, and that's where the Office of New Americans here in New Jersey really comes into play, is to do the research. Let's figure out what are the best practices. Let's see what else we can do. But New Jersey has really, in every of these initiatives that you see, language access is so important to us. We understand how important it is. And we're going to continue to do our very best to improve it even more and expand it even more as much as we can.
That's a challenge that is all across, because even for nonprofit organizations like us, we are lucky that a lot of our staff members are, you know, Spanish speaking. We are lucky that this entire conference is being translated so that, you know, folks can have the opportunity to listen to it. But unfortunately, we only have the capability to do it in Spanish so far. So hopefully throughout the years and in the near future, we are able to provide this great information in other languages, but it's definitely a challenge all across.
Absolutely, and there are many nonprofits that we know, right, across the communities. There are community organizations that serve folks in Arabic, in Korean, and that's where I think our strength is in our partnerships and how we work with so many other nonprofits, community-based organizations, service providers who we know are serving these communities in their languages, so we can better understand how to better serve them. So it's so great to see the diversity, even in the nonprofit sector, how many of you have different skills and different languages that you all support.
Absolutely, yes. And let's talk a little bit about the challenge of education, which it can never be left behind.
Yeah.
We know that in New Jersey, compared to the New Jersey US born population, the immigrants have a less chance of a lower percentage of graduating from schools. So, and I'm not talking about high school, I'm talking about college, professional schools, you name it. So what can we do to encourage the immigrant community to pursue higher education?
So I think part of it is, and I would recommend that folks touch base and look into the Office of the Secretary of Higher Education here in the state of New Jersey, OSHE. They've been doing such great work in educating the community on different programs that they have been implementing. So a couple just off the top of my head are, right now we have a community college, free community college for the first 2 years of your education. Obviously, we also have in-state tuition, where if you're undocumented, you can pay in-state tuition here in the state of New Jersey. Very few states are doing that.
Yes.
We also have financial aid, right? Where if you are a low-income student who needs help paying for school, you can apply for financial aid here in the state of New Jersey. I'm a former dreamer. I was an undocumented student. I went to college. When I went to the College of New Jersey, I was undocumented, and I had to take out student loans to pay for school. And I couldn't get scholarships, even if my grades were good, because at the time I couldn't apply for financial aid. Like, I couldn't qualify. And so much has changed since that time, where if you are a young person now and you're interested in going to school and getting a degree, so many more resources have now been made available here in the state of New Jersey, especially for our immigrant children. And so for students, I would say it's really getting information out about these wonderful programs. What I always say about the Office of New Americans is that if we here in the state of New Jersey have all these wonderful programs and the community doesn't know about them, then we have to work a little bit harder to make sure that they do. And that's why because they're successful when our community knows about them. So I would say let folks know about these programs, because we know that for our community, especially for our young people, financials are probably one of the biggest challenges, right? Aside from immigration status, and that could be another concern. And so if we can get them to take advantage of these programs, I think it would probably help a lot.
And you know what, you touch about on something very, very important, which is DACA, because unfortunately, not a lot, but there are many folks out there that actually qualify for DACA, and they haven't done so. And we have had the program since 2012. So it's been 9 years already. And I don't understand why people don't going to look into, I came here before I was, reaching the age of that I needed to be. I have been here consecutively. So why? I mean, I know that one of the issues is that it's very difficult for some people to prove that they have been here since they were, and that's one of the requirements for the application. Nevertheless, we also know that the amount of people that have applied is relatively small compared to the population that actually qualify.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And I think, with our DACA community, the community who qualifies for DACA, the young people, part of it is financial, right? We know it's an expensive process. All these applications cost money. And if you're a low income, young person and you want to apply, that could become an issue. We understand that. That's unfortunately, there are a lot of barriers. And I think part of it also has been that for the past 4 years, we've had such a chilling effect. And every litigation, every lawsuit, every threat to DACA, every change in policy, they went from 2 years to 1 year to 2 years. All of that, unfortunately, also causes fear, right? As an undocumented, because if you're an undocumented young person and you have to come forward to get your DACA, that means that you are basically outing yourself to the government to let them know you're here. And that can make people really nervous. And I remember when DACA came through, many of us were concerned. And I remember the young people really sharing how concerned they were. Okay, I come forward, I give you my name, I give my information, I pay the fee, and then what are you going to do with that information? And people get nervous. But I think thankfully the program is up and running again. New applications are being accepted again. And so I think it's really about helping folks understand that that has changed too, because I'm sure the back and forth between all that has really confused people to know if they're even if they can even apply now, since we know now we have new applications that are available.
Yeah, it's very important for people, the young people or the people that arrive here as young adults, to understand, like Johanna said, that the applications can be submitted even for people for the first time, that they will get a work permit for the entire 2 years as it was initially intended, and that even people can apply for parole in place, which is a permission for people to travel if there is a humanitarian reason. For instance, if they have a family member outside of the United States that is extremely sick and, you know, they want to go and visit their significant other or their family members. So those things are now in place. And, you know, all the fear and all the litigation that you mentioned that we went through for the last 2 years or for 2 years, you know, it's over. But the question is, how does our community rebuild the trust? I mean, how could we help the community to trust again? Because I mean, we had 4 years of very, very negative rhetoric, and you know, every single possible change in immigration policies to limit the benefits. So is there anything in particular that the office is doing to rebuild the trust in our communities?
So I think part of, you know, it feels like such a simple answer, but having an Office of New Americans in and of itself is a really good first step. It doesn't solve, obviously, the concerns of fear and mistrust in government, but it's great to have an office that understands that there is a fear, understands what could be causing that fear, so we can address it, right? Doing public education is really important. I think at the very beginning of public charge, especially, right, there was a lot of community education in explaining to people what the public charge meant and making sure that I remember the chilling effect that public charge had, and people, I mean, families would ask me if they could do free and reduced lunch, or if they could go to the food pantry, right? Which we knew weren't impacted, but unfortunately that fear was there. And so I think right now what we are really working on is creating public education materials, obviously talking to all of you, make sure that we give folks the information of it's safe. We know public charge, at least the 1999 version, is no longer in place. Folks are not going to be punished for accessing social services. For us, the Office of New Americans, we work with different state agencies and different our colleagues across the board, across the state of New Jersey, but we also are within the Department of Human Services. And this is the largest department across the state of New Jersey. And we have so many social service programs, WIC, SNAP, family care, mental health, all these different programs and services under our division, our department. And many people are not accessing them because they're afraid. And so it's really important for us to, I think, let people know. And I think that has always been a component of outreach and community education for each of those programs, to let people know that they shouldn't be afraid. So I think that's one. The other is, I think that it's really helpful when people know and understand that, at least here in the state of New Jersey, regardless of what's going on at the federal government, and we understand, obviously, with the previous administration, how terrorized our community was. It truly has been traumatic for many of us. But in the state of New Jersey, even despite those 4 years, we've seen so much progress that should make us feel a little better and a little glad that we live in New Jersey, right? And that New Jersey is a little bit different. It's a little bit of a cocoon that has been able to protect us through 4 years that have been so difficult. We got licenses, we got in-state tuition, we've got professional licenses, we have all these things that, while yes, the federal government and federal policy is still delayed, we have some progress that is helping us here. Our Attorney General actually joined litigation to protect DACA, represented DACA recipients here in the state of New Jersey to make sure that their voices were included in the voices of the states. New Jersey added our name in our litigation to protect DACA at the federal level. And there have been plenty of lawsuits that our Attorney General has joined to support immigrant communities at the federal level and to represent New Jersey immigrants, to say, no, for New Jersey, this is not going to be helpful. We don't want it here. And I think that message really shows something for our immigrant community here in New Jersey, to know that our Attorney General cares about them too, and that our governor cares about them too. And here at the Office of New Americans, we also care about them too, and we want to make sure that they don't feel afraid.
You're absolutely right. I think that actions speak louder than words. So the fact that we have an office, and you nail it on the head. I mean, we are lucky in New Jersey to have one of the most progressive states, one of the most open-minded states in terms of helping the immigrant community. So even it's almost like a sanctuary state. You know, we always talk about sanctuary cities, but in here we know that the police doesn't cooperate too much with the federal agencies as far as giving information about immigrants, and that's wonderful. So we want to highlight that to all the participants, because like you say, the need is huge. And we know that there are a lot of families out there that are still very afraid of seeking services. And the state of New Jersey provides so many services from different levels, you know, in the health, for food, for work development, and, you know, so folks, this is an invitation for you to get familiarized with all the services that our great states provide. In our website, we have spent a lot of time making sure that we research which are the state departments and which are the agencies that provide these services. And there is a whole bunch of information that you can get just by visiting our website. So please make sure that you do so. And Johanna, you mentioned also that you work with different departments, and I know that you have worked very, very closely with the Department of Labor and Workforce Development, obviously to help the immigrant community get the skills to be better prepared for the workforce. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I came on board with the Office of New Americans, one of our major projects that we signed on, that obviously COVID was priority, but this was another, is the Skilled Immigrant Integration Program. And so that's actually a cohort project. I believe we were one of 6 or 8 localities, state or local municipal, that worked on including workforce integration as part of their priority. So here in the state of New Jersey, we joined this program with our Department of Labor to ensure and look through ideas and priorities and initiatives that would help immigrants navigate through our workforce and make sure that they are able to integrate into the workforce. And we're still working through some of these initiatives now. So for instance, we have been having conversations. I mentioned the professional licensing for doctors, right? We know how many public health employees, healthcare employees are immigrant, and many of them maybe had a degree from their home country. How do we help them upskill that so that they can get a different, you know, maybe we know, right, how difficult it might be to get the credentialing, but there could be other career pathways for them to get them to something that is closer to what they were doing back home. And we know that that exists. And so through the Department of Labor has really been thinking through career pathways to make sure that we help our community navigate that, make sure that we are letting folks know about higher education and adult education and ESL programs and all the various services that our Department of Labor has to offer in their frontline offices, right? To make sure that our community does not feel afraid to do that, because those services are available to them. And then for us to also think through what are some of the other barriers that folks might be facing in entering the workforce? Beyond that, what do those partnerships look like? Working with private companies and businesses, and really thinking through what that looks like to make sure that we create opportunities for our communities to get the experience that they need to be able to get those careers going. And so those are the type of questions and topics that we're thinking through now to make sure that we elevate, even because that's already happening, right? ESL, adult education, upskilling, all of that is being provided by our Department of Labor now. But how do we make sure that our immigrant and refugee communities know, and then they also take advantage of those programs? And so it's been really important, and it's helpful actually to be part of the Skilled Immigrant Integration Program, because we talk with our colleagues from other localities, from states, for state government and municipal governments, to learn from them and see what they have been doing that has been successful. Because we also know that we can borrow ideas from other states, and national trends are national trends. And so it's really good for us to learn from other colleagues across the country as to what they are doing to also support our immigrant communities entering into the workforce.
That's wonderful. That's really great, because it's an aspect that is one of the most important. Obviously, the immigrant, the largest part of the immigrant community comes to the United States to seek a better life, to get better jobs, better opportunities, and what better to give them the tools to be ready for the workforce. So thank you. And you know what? One of the repeated complaints that we hear from the immigrant community is that oftentimes, unfortunately, employers take advantage of them because they're immigrants, even for the people that are documented and that have their social securities, but they complain that often they pay either below the minimum wage or just the minimum wage, or that they make them work extremely long hours. So tell us a little bit about how could we prevent work exploitation?
Yeah, so our Department of Labor, besides the workforce integration, also obviously has a lot of worker rights and worker protection efforts. So I would say for folks to, and actually the Department of Labor has a lot of materials, public education, know your rights materials to let workers know what their rights are. For instance, in New Jersey, and this has become pretty prevalent under COVID, how many immigrant workers we know, even though New Jersey has paid sick leave, and you can take sick days here in the state of New Jersey, and even though we have minimum wage, which is also law, how many of our communities decided that they didn't want to take their days off because their employer wasn't necessarily telling them that they could take the days off, or they didn't know that they could take the days off? But we're dealing with a global pandemic, and I've heard anecdotally how many folks don't want to get the vaccine yet because they're afraid that they're going to have to take a day off because of the side effects. And so they just don't do it because they don't want to take a day off of work. But this is where it's really important for our community to know this is the law. There are paid sick leave is the law. Minimum wage is the law. And so we, you and I and so many others who are doing a community public education is really to let them know about their rights. And the Department of Labor has done such a good job in just making materials and talking to folks and really letting the community know, here are your rights, know what your rights are, so that when your employer says, no, you can't take a sick day, you know that you are protected, and that the Department of Labor has places in place to be able to help you. Wage theft is another, and we know that's a huge issue. Same thing, there was legislation that was passed that prevents wage theft and penalizes businesses that don't pay their fair wages. And so just check with the Department of Labor. I would really urge folks to go to their website, go to their social media, check their information. There's a lot of really good resources for them if they are in this situation.
And talking about minimum wage, Governor Murphy also signed a law to increase minimum wage
That's right.
last year.
That's right.
It's going to be a progressive increase on a yearly basis, correct?
That is correct. And this is where it's important for all of our communities to know, because maybe you are making $7 an hour and you didn't know that the law changed, and there's a new law that many people fought for minimum wage, which makes New Jersey's minimum wage $15. And so if folks don't know that, they could check it out. But you're right, this legislation was signed, and so our minimum wage is higher. So if folks are getting paid under that, they really should check out the Department of Labor, because that would be a violation of the law.
That's absolutely right. Johanna, we are getting to the end of the program. Do you want to give any closing statements, any recommendations to our community, anything that you can recommend?
So what I would say is, we at the Office of New Americans are still growing. We are hoping to have more information to the public on public education and have our website up and grow as a department and as an office here. So please look out for us. We're going to keep growing and sharing information to the public once we're ready. But we're so glad to be here, and we're here to support all of you. Please see the Office of New Americans as an opportunity to really make connections with the state government and to support it. And for all of you, especially who work with community-based organizations, providers, legal services, we really are so incredibly thankful for the work you all do, so grateful for the work you all do, and also so understanding of the fact that so many of you are really at the front lines and you understand what the challenges are for the community. So we continue to see you as partners in the work that we do for the Office of New Americans, and obviously the immigrant community. I'll also be remiss if we don't highlight the fact that it's Immigrant Heritage Month. And so we are going to celebrate and continue to celebrate the fact that our heritage in our state of New Jersey, really what comes from it is that we are a state that has immigrants here and has been very much influenced and benefited by so many immigrant communities that live here in the state of New Jersey. So incredibly grateful to have been here, and thanks so much for having me.
Johanna, it's been a pleasure having you. The information that you have provided is extremely important for our community. Folks out there, I hope that you enjoy the presentation. Please take advantage of all the information and the services that are out there. IACO is extremely pleased, as I mentioned in the beginning, to have the Office of New Americans, and we are very optimistic to continue working together. We have these conferences on an annual basis, so next year, Johanna, I'm sure that we will have you again. We wish you the best of luck in your office in this new endeavor. And thank you. I really appreciate your time, your commitment, also everything that you have done even prior to getting to this position, because your advocacy speaks for itself. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Bye-bye, everyone.
Agradecemos mucho su participación.
We appreciate your participation. Please do not forget to fill in the surveys. Remember that your response is absolutely private, confidential, and we will not compile any personal information. Your suggestions and comments will help us improve for future editions of our event. Thank you very much.